They called me the Concrete King. I built the hospitals where their children were born. I poured the foundations for the banks where they hid their money. My son looked me in the eye, handed me $300, and told me to get off his property before I ruined his reputation. He thought I was broken. He thought I was just a senile old man who had lost his fortune. He was about to learn that wet concrete eventually hardens, and when it does, it crushes everything in its way. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. It was early, but the storm was just beginning. The silence in the mansion wasn't simply an absence of noise. It was a physical weight, heavy and suffocating, like a blanket woven from lead. It didn't smell like a home where bread was baked or children ran through hallways with muddy boots. It smelled of lemon beeswax polish, conditioned leather, and aggressively filtered cold air. It was the sterile, antiseptic scent of money holding its breath, terrified of being contaminated by the real world. I sat in my wingback chair, the leather creaking softly beneath me, a sound that echoed too loudly in the cavernous study. My name is Frank. I am 72 years old. My net worth is a number so large it has ceased to be money, and has become gravity. It orbits me, keeping people at a distance, pulling in only those who want to mine the surface. I own cars. I have not started in a decade, and rooms in this very house that I haven't stepped foot in since the Clinton administration. But tonight, the billions didn't matter. Tonight, I was just a structural engineer, looking at a photograph of my late wife Martha in a silver frame. My back ached, a dull, grinding throb near the lumbar spine. It was a reminder of the years before the suits, back when I carried hod carriers full of wet cement and rebar up unfinished stairwells. I ran a thumb over the glass of the frame. Martha was smiling, that cryptic, knowing smile she used to give me when I worried about the future. "We messed up, Martha," I whispered. My voice was raspy, unused to speaking in the empty house. "We calculated the loads wrong. I think we broke them." The silence in the room seemed to agree with me. In engineering, a foundation failure doesn't always happen all at once. It starts with a hairline fracture invisible to the naked eye. Water gets in, it freezes, it expands, and years later, the whole building comes down. We gave our children everything to prevent them from struggling. Private schools with crests on the blazers, trust funds that matured before they knew the value of $1, European vacations where they never had to carry their own luggage. We thought we were building a reinforced concrete foundation for their lives. I was wrong. We hadn't built a foundation. We had built them on sand, and we had shielded them from the wind so they never grew roots. The phone on the mahogany desk buzzed. The vibration rattled a crystal paperweight. It was a sharp, angry sound that sliced through the melancholy. I looked at the caller ID. Robert, my eldest. The CEO, the boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee, was now a man who fired people via email. I had handed him the keys to the kingdom. Frank Construction and Holdings. 3 years ago. I wanted to retire. I wanted to rest. I picked up the heavy receiver. "Hello, Dad," Robert said. There was no greeting, no warmth, no "how is your back," or "did you eat dinner?" His voice was clipped, hurried, the tone of a man addressing a subordinate who was wasting his time. "I need you to sign the transfer papers for the Cayman accounts. The tax auditors are sniffing around the shell companies again." I closed my eyes. "Hello to you too, Robert," I said, keeping my voice steady. "How are the kids? How is little Timmy's soccer season going?" "Fine. They're fine," Robert dismissed the question as if it were static on the line. "Listen, the courier is 5 minutes away. Sign the papers immediately. We can't let the IRS get a cent. The margins are already tight this quarter." "Robert," I started. "I was looking at your mother's picture and—" "Dad, please." "Not now," he snapped. "I have the board on the other line. Just sign the papers." "This is business." He hung up. The disconnect tone droned in my ear before I placed the receiver back in the cradle. My chest tightened, a constriction that had nothing to do with my heart health and everything to do with heartbreak. He didn't care about me. He didn't even see me. To Robert, I was just a signature required to unlock the vault. He didn't want a father, I thought, the realization settling in my gut like cold oatmeal. He wanted an ATM that breathed. I hadn't even processed the pain of the first call when the phone buzzed again. Sarah, my daughter, the socialite. The girl who once made me wear a tiara for a tea party was now a woman who measured affection in carats. Daddy, she chirped. The enthusiasm was dialed up to 11, but it felt thin, like gold leaf over cheap plastic. I have a crisis. A total disaster. Are you hurt? I asked, sitting up straighter. What? No. It's the florist in Chicago. He is useless. Utterly incompetent, she ranted. I need the Gulf Stream. I need to fly in the Vanda orchids from Thailand for the gala on Saturday. The theme is Eastern Promise, and domestic flowers just won't do. The gala for the homeless shelter? I asked, the irony tasting bitter on my tongue. You want to burn $50,000 of jet fuel to fly flowers? For the homeless? Yes. It has to be perfect for the donors, Daddy. Appearances are everything. If the centerpieces look cheap, the donations will be cheap. So, can I take the jet? I need the flight crew prepped by 6. I trailed off. She wasn't asking how I was. She wasn't calling to say hello. She was calling logistics. Daddy, are you there? The reception is terrible. You was to text the pilot, okay? Love you? Bye. The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone, my heart feeling like a stone sinking into a deep, dark well. They didn't see a man. They didn't see the structural engineer who had poured the concrete for the skyscrapers they partied in. They saw a resource, a dwindling resource that was running out of time. Then, inevitably, my thoughts drifted to the one who hadn't called. Lucy, my youngest. The rebel. The one I hadn't seen in 2 years. I closed my eyes and pictured her, the grease under her fingernails, the stubborn set of her jaw, so like mine. She was living in a converted garage on the south side, married to a mechanic I had called unambitious to his face. She never called, and in the silence of this museum-like house, that silence hurt the most, because unlike the others, Lucy didn't want anything from me, which meant she didn't want me either. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. Henderson, get in here. A moment later, the heavy oak doors opened. Arthur Henderson walked in. He was a small man, meticulously dressed in gray wool, holding a leather folio. Arthur had been my lawyer since I was mixing cement in a wheelbarrow, and he was filing lawsuits for slip and falls. We were both old now, weathered by the erosion of business. Frank, Arthur said, noting my posture. You look like you're carrying the weight of the Empire State Building. Arthur, I said, ignoring the pleasantry. Run the simulation. Arthur froze halfway to the chair. He adjusted his glasses, his eyes widening behind the thick lenses. The bankruptcy protocol. Frank, that's extreme. We talked about this as a theoretical exercise. It means freezing everything. The liquidity, the credit cards, the assets. The media will go crazy. The stock price will wobble. Do it, I said, my voice hard. I'm tired of guessing. Arthur, I'm an engineer. I need to stress test the structure. I need to know the load-bearing capacity of their lab. Arthur sat down slowly, looking at me with profound sadness. It's a dangerous test, Frank. If you strip away the money, you might find there's nothing underneath. It will hurt. You might not like what you see. I expect pain, I said, looking back at Martha's photo. I expect cracks in the drywall. I hope the foundation holds. I just need to find a little truth before I die. And if the truth is dark, Arthur asked softly. I had turned my chair to face the window, looking out at the manicured grounds that looked black in the night. Then I'll know, I whispered. Initiate the leak. Tomorrow morning, Frank is ruined. But I had no idea, I thought as the rain began to tick against the glass, just how dark the truth really was. I was preparing for a stress fracture. I wasn't prepared for the building to collapse on top of me. The next morning, the world didn't just end. It was dismantled, brick by brick, with terrifying efficiency. It started at 8:00 a.m. sharp. Arthur Henderson was a man of his word. He leaked the story to a financial contact at the Journal, a hungry reporter who didn't ask too many questions if the tip came from the inside. By 8:15 a.m., the headline was flashing across the Bloomberg terminal in my study, Frank's foundations in ruin. Fraud investigation launched. Assets frozen. I watched the screen. The stock ticker for my company plummeted. It was a red line diving straight down, a graphic representation of a heart stopping. By noon, the silence of the house changed. It was no longer the heavy silence of wealth. It was the hollow, echoing silence of a tomb. My accounts were locked. The credit cards my children used, the black cards that bought unplanned weekends in Aspen and last-minute tables at impossible restaurants, were dead plastic. I stood in the center of my walk-in closet. It was the size of my first apartment. Rows of Italian wool suits hung like soldiers in formation. Shelves of handmade leather shoes, cedar trees inside them to keep their shape. It was a museum of a man I had become, a man I didn't particularly like anymore. I pushed aside the Armani and the Zagna. I went to the very back, behind the rack of winter coats that smelled of dry cleaning chemicals. There, tucked in the corner, was a battered cardboard box. I hadn't opened it in 20 years. I pulled it out. Dust motes danced in the recessed lighting. Inside were the artifacts of my previous life. A pair of Carhartt canvas pants, stiff with age and stained with the indelible black grease of a job site. A flannel shirt, the elbows worn thin. A heavy, insulated canvas jacket that smelled faintly of diesel and sawdust. I stripped off my silk robe. I put on the pants. They were rough against my skin. Unforgiving. They didn't drape. They protected. I buttoned the flannel shirt. It was tight across the shoulders. I had gained weight, the soft weight of sedentary luxury, not the lean muscle of labor. I sat on the velvet ottoman to lace up the work boots. My hands trembled slightly. Not from age, but from a strange, vibrating adrenaline. I was shedding the skin of the billionaire. I stood up and walked to the full-length mirror. I took off my Patek Philippe watch, a $60,000 piece of machinery that told time, no better than a $10 digital, and set it on the island counter. I messed up my silver hair, destroying the precise part the barber gave me every Tuesday. I hadn't shaved in 2 days. The white stubble on my jaw looked like frost on pavement. I looked at the reflection. The titan of industry was gone. Frank the bricklayer was back. He looked older, tired, and smaller. "Goodbye, King," I whispered to the glass. "Let's see who opens the door for a peasant." I walked out of the master suite and down the service hallway. I avoided the grand staircase. The grand staircase was for guests and photos. The service stairs were for the people who actually made the house run. Elena, my head housekeeper, was coming up the narrow stairs holding a wicker basket of fresh linens. She stopped when she saw me. Her eyes traveled from my scuffed boots to the oil stain on my pant leg, up to my unkempt hair. She glanced at the small television mounted in the kitchen corner. The news was still running the banner, "I Empire Collapse." She didn't gasp. She didn't ask if it was true. Elena had been with me for 15 years. She had seen me stare out the window at 3:00 a.m. She knew the difference between the man and the myth. She set the basket down on the floor. She walked over to the counter, took a brown paper bag, and folded the top down with precise, caring creases. "A ham sandwich," she said softly, her accent thick but gentle. "Mustard, no mayo. And a Honeycrisp apple. It is cold outside today, Mr. Frank. The wind is coming off the lake." She handed me the bag. The paper crinkled in the quiet kitchen. "You know?" I asked, my voice tight. "I know you," she corrected. She looked at me with a pity that cut deeper than judgment. "You are testing the beams, to see if they hold?" I nodded slowly. "Be careful, Mr. Frank?" she whispered, stepping closer. "Wolves bite harder when they smell blood. They do not care that you fed them when they were pups." She glanced toward the security monitors on the wall. "And watch out for the man in the gray sedan. He has been parked outside the main gate since dawn. He is not press." I looked at the grainy screen. A gray Chevy was idling just beyond the wrought iron gates. "Thank you, Elena," I said. "Go," she said, picking up her laundry basket. "Find what you are looking for. I will keep the dust off your chair." I hadn't even left the house, I thought, and the vultures were already circling. Elena knew. The staff always knows before the family does. I walked out the side door, bypassing the heated 6-car garage. I stepped directly into the weather. It was a cold, miserable November rain. The kind that doesn't wash things clean but just makes the world look gray and sodden. The wind hit me instantly, biting through the canvas jacket. It was a shock to my system. For 40 years I had moved from heated house to heated car to heated office. I had forgotten what the raw world felt like. I reached into my pocket. I had $40 in small bills and a burner phone. Arthur had bought for me at a 7-Eleven. No GPS. No tracking. The phone buzzed against my hip, stopped under the overhang of the security shack, sheltering the screen from the rain. A text from an unknown number. "Watch your back, Frank. The sharks smell blood. Don't trust the phones." I stared at the screen, rain dripping from the brim of my hat. Who was Arthur? Hadn't mentioned an accomplice. Was it a threat? A warning? My heart hammered a jagged rhythm against my ribs. Paranoia, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I looked toward the gate. The gray sedan was there. The windows were tinted dark. I didn't have time to solve mysteries. I had a bus to catch. I walked past the gray car, keeping my head down, hunched against the wind. The car didn't move, but as I turned the corner onto the main road, I felt the heavy gaze of someone watching me disappear. Robert lived in the Enclave, a gated community 20 miles north. It was a fortress of new money. The McMansons packed too close together, trying to look like old estates. It took me 3 hours to get there. I took the 44 bus to the train station, then the commuter rail, then another bus that dropped me a mile from his gate. The journey was a physical assault. The bus smelled of wet wool and exhaustion. I stood for half the trip, swaying with the lurch of the vehicle, my bad knee screaming in protest. People looked through me. To them, I was just another old laborer, probably on his way to fix a toilet or paint a fence. I was invisible. By the time I reached the gate of the Enclave, I was shivering uncontrollably. My joints were on fire. The dampness had seeped into my bones. The guard shack was sleek, designed to look like a lodge. The guard was new, a big guy, neck thick with muscle, name tag reading Carl. He was chewing gum with an open mouth, watching a football game on a tablet. I knocked on the glass. Carl slid the window open 2 inches. A blast of warm air hit my face, smelling of coffee and heater coils. "Help you?" he grunted, not looking away from the tablet. "I'm here to see Robert Frank," I said. My teeth chattered, making the words slur slightly. "I'm his father." Carl finally looked at me. He scanned the wet canvas jacket, the oil stains, the unkempt gray stubble. He let out a short, derisive bark of laughter. "Right," Carl said, popping his gum. "And I'm the Pope. Beat it, Pop. No solicitors, no beggars. I am Frank, Senior," I wheezed, leaning against the damp brickwork for support. "Call him, please." Something in my tone, perhaps the sheer desperation, or the command that still lingered in my voice from decades of being the boss, made him pause. He frowned, picked up the phone, and dialed. He watched me through the glass as he spoke, his expression shifting from amusement to confusion. Yeah, he says. Okay. Got it." Carl hung up. The gate didn't open. He slid the window open again, looking at me with a mix of pity and annoyance. "He says you can come in," Carl said, "but you can't walk up the main drive. It upsets the residents. Go around the perimeter path to the service entrance." The back door, I repeated. "Yeah, and keep it moving. If security sees you loitering, they'll pick you up." The pedestrian gate clicked open. I walked through it. The back door, I thought, my boots squelching on the perfectly manicured asphalt. Like the trash, like the help, I had paid for this community's development. My company poured the foundations for these houses. I had signed the check for Robert's down payment, and now I was being routed through the service alley so the neighbors wouldn't see the stain on the family name. The wind picked up, howling through the decorative pine trees. I put my head down and kept walking. The golden lights of Robert's house were ahead, warm and inviting, but they felt a million miles away. The driveway to Robert's house was a winding ribbon of blacktop, lined with imported birch trees that looked ghostly in the headlights of passing security patrols. I walked on the grass verge to avoid being seen, my boots sinking into the sodden earth. The cold was no longer just on my skin. It was inside me, a deep, shivering ache that made my teeth chatter in a rhythm I couldn't control. As I rounded the final bend, the house came into view. It was a sprawling neo-colonial mansion, a testament to excess that I had helped finance. But tonight, it didn't look like a home. It looked like an age set. Huge bay windows glowed with a warm golden light. Through the rain-slicked glass, I could see the life I was supposed to be living. I saw the crystal chandelier in the dining room, shimmering like a suspended constellation. I saw staff in crisp white uniforms moving with synchronized precision, setting a long mahogany table with silver cutlery. I saw a fire roaring in the hearth, casting long dancing shadows on walls covered in silk wallpaper. It was a scene of aggressive comfort. And I was standing in the mud, 40 feet away, watching it like a ghost, haunting his own life. My stomach cramped, a sharp, hollow pain. I hadn't eaten since the apple Elena gave me. The smell of roasting meat vented from the kitchen exhaust, drifting across the yard. It was a cruel sensory assault. I limped toward the back of the house. The service entrance. I hesitated at the door. My hand hovered over the wood. This was the hardest part. Not the cold, not the hunger, but the humility. I had to knock on my son's door and beg, test the beam. I reminded myself. Apply the load. I knocked. 3 sharp raps. Inside, the movement stopped. A shadow approached the frosted glass. The lock tumbled. A heavy, expensive sound. The door swung open. Robert stood there. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than the car I used to drive in my 20s. He held a tumbler of amber liquid, Macallan neat, in one hand. The air that rushed out around him was scented with expensive cologne and wood smoke. He looked down. He blinked, his eyes adjusting to the darkness of the yard. When he recognized me, his expression didn't soften. It curdled. "Dad?" he hissed, the word escaping like steam. He looked left, then right, checking the yard for witnesses before looking back at me. His gaze traveled over my soaked canvas jacket, the oil stains on my pants, the water dripping from my nose. It was a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "What is this?" he demanded, keeping his voice low but venomous. "I saw the news, but look at you. Is it true? Are we really broke?" "It's gone, Bobby," I lied. My voice trembled, partly from the cold, partly from the performance. "The feds, they froze the accounts at noon. They seized the house. I have nowhere to go." I took a step forward, reaching a shaking hand toward the warmth of the kitchen. "I'm cold, son. Let me in." Robert didn't step back to let me pass. He planted his feet. He blocked the doorway. "You can't be serious," he said, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "This is a nightmare. I have investors calling my personal line. The stock is tanking. The board is freaking out." "How could you be so stupid, Dad? How did you let them catch you?" "I made mistakes," I whispered, lowering my head. "I'm sorry. Can I just sit by the fire? Just for tonight? I'm 72 years old, Robert. I'm freezing." Robert looked over his shoulder. In the hallway behind him, his wife, Ashley, appeared. She was wearing a cocktail dress, diamonds glittering at her throat. She saw me wet, dirty, pathetic, and her face hardened into a mask of revulsion. She didn't speak. She just locked eyes with Robert and mouthed a single word, "No." It was a silent command, absolute and terrifying. Robert turned back to me. The conflict in his eyes lasted less than a second, before self-preservation took over. "I can't, Dad," he said. "The crisis management team is on their way. The board is coming for an emergency meeting in an hour. If they see you here, looking like this, looking like a hobo, it admits guilt. It destroys our image. We have to contain the narrative." "I built this house," I said, my voice cracking. "I paid for the roof over your head, and you lost it," he snapped, his control slipping. "You torched the legacy. You are toxic right now. Do you understand? You are radioactive." He set his glass down on the entry table and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a money clip, gold engraved with his initials. He peeled off a wad of cash without counting it. "Here," he shoved the bills into my wet hand. "That's 300. Go to a motel. The one out on the highway. Get away from here. Don't use your name." I looked down at the money. The bills were crisp, dry. In my wet hand, they immediately began to dampen. "You're paying me to leave?" I asked. looking up at him. "I'm your father, Robert. I'm managing a crisis," he shouted, then checked his volume, glancing at the neighbor's hedges. "Just go. I'll call you when the heat dies down. If it dies down. Robert, go!" He grabbed the door handle and slammed it shut. The sound was like a gunshot. Then came the metallic click-clack of the deadbolt sliding home. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the wood. The grain was beautiful, quarter-sawn oak. I remembered selecting it from the catalog for him. My own son, I thought, the grief washing over me, colder than the rain. He didn't want to save me. He had to pay me to disappear. I looked at the $300 in my hand. It felt dirty. It felt like severance pay for a lifetime of parenthood. I turned to leave, my boots heavy as lead. I began to trudge back toward the darkness of the yard. But then, movement in the kitchen window caught my eye. I stopped. I stepped behind a large rhododendron bush and peered through the wet leaves. It wasn't Robert. Standing in the kitchen, bathed in the warm light I had been denied, was a man in a gray suit. He was older, balding, with spectacles perched on a narrow nose. My breath hitched in my throat. It was Dr. Evans, our family physician for 20 years, the man who had treated my high blood pressure, who had given the kids their flu shots. Why is Dr. Evans in my son's kitchen at 7:00 p.m. on a Tuesday? Robert walked into the frame. He wasn't frantic anymore. He looked calm, conspiratorial. He was talking to Evans. Evans nodded slowly. He was holding a thick manila file. He tapped the file with his finger, then opened it, pointing to a document. Robert leaned in, reading it, then nodded vigorously. He poured Dr. Evans a drink. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather crawled up my spine. Doctors don't make house calls for corporate crisis meetings. Doctors don't drink scotch with the son of a ruined man, unless the topic isn't finance, but physiology. I watched them toast. Robert raised his glass.
Evans.
Raised his They smiled. It wasn't a smile of comfort. It was a smile of victory. They aren't just hiding me, I realized, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. They are planning something. Something medical. Something permanent. I backed away slowly, terrified that the snap of a twig would give me away. The text message from M flashed in my mind. The sharks smell blood. I had thought the shark was the bankruptcy. I was wrong. The shark was in the kitchen, wearing a gray suit, holding a file that likely contained my life. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the pain in my knees. I ran into the dark, away from the golden window, away from the son who had just sold me for $300 and a quiet conscience. I took a taxi back to the city. It cost me $60 of Robert's $300. The driver, a man with tired eyes who smelled of cigarettes and pine air freshener, looked at me in the rearview mirror the entire time, debating whether I was going to rob him or vomit in his back seat. I had him drop me off 2 blocks from Sarah's building. I needed to walk. I needed to compose myself. The adrenaline from Robert's betrayal was fading, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion that settled in the marrow of my bones. Sarah lived in the spire, a 70-story needle of glass and steel that punctured the Chicago skyline. I knew it well. My company had poured the caissons. I knew exactly how deep the steel piles went into the bedrock. I knew the wind-blowed calculations for the upper floors. I had built the cage she lived in. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and silent intimidation. The doorman was young, uniformed in navy blue with gold piping. He stepped out to intercept me before I could touch the brass handle of the revolving door. "Service entrance is around the side, sir," he said, his hand raised in a polite but firm stop gesture. "I'm here to see Sarah Frame." "Penthouse B," I said. I stood as tall as my aching back would allow. "I am her father." The doorman faltered. He looked at my face beneath the grime and the stubble, and saw the resemblance, or perhaps he recognized the eyes that had stared out from the cover of Forbes years ago. "Mr. He hesitated. I didn't recognize you. I'll ring up." He went to the desk. He spoke in hushed tones into a receiver. He nodded, looked at me, then nodded again. "She says you can come up," he said, his voice dropping an octave. Elevator 4. But sir, please try not to touch the walls. They're velvet. Try not to touch the walls. I thought as the elevator surged upward, my ears popping. I am a contagion. The elevator doors slid open directly into the foyer of Penthouse B. The apartment was aggressively white. White marble floors, white leather furniture, white orchids in crystal vases. It was beautiful, sterile, and cold. It looked like the waiting room to heaven, or a very expensive mental institution. Sarah was standing in the center of the living room. She was wearing a silk kimono worth more than the average car. Her face was covered in a green clay mask, cracking slightly as she pursed her lips. "Dad!" she shrieked. It wasn't a greeting, it was an accusation. "You're dripping! You're dripping on the Tibetan wool." I looked down. My boots were leaving muddy, wet prints on the pristine white rug, a dark trail of reality in our fantasy world. "I'm bankrupt, Sarah," I said, my voice hoarse. I didn't have the energy to soften the blow. Robert kicked me out. The feds took the house. I have nowhere to go. Sarah's eyes went wide behind the green mask. For a second I saw fear. But it wasn't fear for me. "Bankrupt?" she breathed. "Wait. Does that mean the accounts? The trust? The gala?" "There is no gala, Sarah," I said, stepping off the rug onto the marble. "There is no jet. There are no orchids. I am on the street." She didn't cry. She didn't run to hug me. She began to pace, the silk of her robe swishing frantically. She grabbed her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. "Do you know how this makes me look?" she demanded, turning on me. "My phone is blowing up. Twitter is trending. People are texting me. Is your dad a crook? Are we still on for the Hamptons? I'm going to be a joke, Dad. A literal joke. I'm hungry, Sarah," I said quietly. "I haven't eaten a real meal in 2 days." She stopped pacing. She looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the calculation behind her eyes. She wasn't seeing a hungry father. She was seeing a liability. "There's fruit in the bowl." She pointed vaguely to the kitchen. "But you can't stay here. Julian is coming home any minute, and we have the pre-gala mixer, and I need a bed." I interrupted. "Just a couch, for one night." "A couch?" She laughed, a brittle, hysterical sound. "This isn't a frat house, Dad. This is a curated living space. Everything is white. You look like you rolled in a ditch." "I did," I said. "I had to walk through the mud to get to Robert's back door." "Well, you can't stay here," a voice came from the hallway behind her. Smooth. Cultured. Detached. "What is that smell?" Julian walked in. Her fiancé. He was a consultant, a title that seemed to mean he specialized in spending other people's money on wine and ergonomic chairs. He was wearing a suit that fit him like a second skin. He wrinkled his nose, sniffing the air theatrically. "It smells like wet dog and diesel." "It's my father," Sarah said, gesturing to me as if I were a spilled drink. "He says he's bankrupt." Julian's eyebrows rose. He looked me up and down, his face settling into a sneer of amused contempt. "Ah, the fallen giant," Julian drawled. "I saw the news. Insider trading, Ponzi scheme, or just senility." "Julian," I warned, my hands curling into fists at my sides. "Frank, let's be reasonable," Julian said, stepping between me and Sarah. He didn't offer a hand. He kept his distance. "You can't stay here. The co-op board has strict bylaws regarding transients. Guests must be registered. And frankly, looking like that, you're a security risk." Transients. The word hung in the air. That's what I was now. Not a father, not a grandfather. A transient, a squatter. "I paid for this apartment," I said, my voice rising, shaking the glass walls. "I put the down payment on this penthouse. My name is on the deed." "Actually," Julian smiled, a shark-like baring of teeth, "it's in a trust, which, if the news is correct, is currently frozen. So technically you have no claim here." "I can't deal with this," Sarah yelled, clutching her head. "My massage therapist is coming in 10 minutes. I have to be relaxed. Stress causes wrinkles, Dad. You were literally aging me." I looked at her. My little girl. I remembered holding her when she had chicken pox, staying up all night to put cool cloths on her forehead. I remembered teaching her to ride a bike. Now she was worried about wrinkles while her father stood starving in her living room. "You're kicking me out?" I asked. "For a massage?" "I'm asking you to leave," she screamed. "Go to a shelter. Go to Lucy. She loves living in filth. She'll probably love this." She marched to the door and held it open. "Get out!" I looked at Julian. He was checking his cuticles. Bored, I walked to the door. As I passed Sarah, I stopped. I wanted to say something profound. I wanted to tell her that money is paper, but family is blood. But looking at her mask-covered face, I realized she didn't understand. She was paper, too. "Good luck with the orchids, Sarah," I whispered. She slammed the door in my face. I stood in the hallway. The silence of the corridor was absolute. I slid down the wall until I hit the floor. I put my head in my hands. 2 children, 2 rejections, 2 strangers I had created. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A violent jolt against my hip. I pulled it out, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped it. It was another text from M. "Get out of the building, now. Evans is signing the competency papers tonight. They aren't just taking the money. They are declaring you mentally unfit. Dementia. If they find you, they can commit you involuntarily. Don't let them find you." I stared at the screen, the blue light illuminating the tears on my face. Competency papers. The meeting in Robert's kitchen. The file Dr. Evans was holding. The toast. They weren't just greedy, they were trying to erase me. If they declared me incompetent, everything I had done in the last 6 months, including the changes to my will, including any attempts to stop them, would be annulled. They would lock me in a facility, medicate me into a stupor, and pick the carcass of my company clean. My blood ran cold. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a primal, animalistic fear. They are trying to declare me insane. I scrambled to my feet. The hallway suddenly felt like a trap. The elevator chime dinged. Someone was coming up. Was it them, the men in white coats? Private security? I didn't wait to find out. I ran for the fire stairs. I pushed through the heavy door and began to descend. 70 flights of concrete stairs running from the wolves I had raised. I had one hope left. One child left, Lucy, but I hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. Not since I told her she was throwing her life away by marrying a mechanic. Not since I told her she was a disappointment. Now, she was the only person in the world who could save me from being buried alive. The descent from the penthouse was a physical penance. 70 flights of concrete fire stairs, my knees already screaming from the cold, felt like they were filled with ground glass. By the time I pushed open the emergency exit at street level, my legs were trembling so violently I could barely stand. I didn't take a taxi this time. I couldn't risk the paper trail, and I was running low on Robert's hush money. I took the Ella train. The city changed around me as the train rattled down the tracks. The glittering skyline of the loop receded, replaced by the skeletal remains of industry. Brick factories with broken windows, warehouses guarded by razor wire. The smell of money, ozone, and expensive perfume was replaced by the smell of sulfur, wet asphalt, and frying grease. This was the South Side, the industrial district, a place I hadn't visited since I was a young man bidding on demolition contracts. It was nearly midnight when I found it, laid in auto repair. The building was an old brick garage, squeezed between a tire dump and a rusted-out textile factory. The neon sign above the bay door was flickering, the M buzzing intermittently like a dying insect. The wind here was crueler. It whipped across the open lots, carrying grit and sleet. I stood across the street, huddled in my canvas jacket, watching the garage. The lights were still on inside. I walked across the cracked pavement. The large bay door was rolled up halfway inside. The air smelled of $10.30 oil, stale coffee, and the sharp, metallic tang of an oxyacetylene torch. To me, it didn't smell like poverty. It smelled like work. It smelled like the beginning of my life. I ducked under the door. "Shop's closed?" A voice yelled from underneath a Ford F-50 hoisted on the hydraulic lift. "If you're looking for the impound, it's 2 blocks over." I froze. I knew that voice. It was sharper now, tired, but it was hers. "It's not a customer," I said. My voice was a wreck. a rasping whisper that barely carried over the hum of the air compressor. The wrenching sound stopped. A mechanic's creeper rolled out from under the truck. Lucy, she was wearing navy blue coveralls covered in black grease. Her hair was tied back in a messy bandana, stray strands sticking to her forehead with sweat. She had a smudge of oil on her cheek, right where I used to kiss her goodnight. She sat up on the creeper, wiping her hands on a rag. She squinted at the silhouette standing in the rain-soaked entrance. "We don't keep cash on the premises," she warned, standing up and grabbing a heavy torque wrench. She was ready to fight. I stepped into the light. "Lucy," I said. The wrench clattered to the concrete floor. "Dad?" She took a step forward, her eyes scanning me. She saw the wet clothes, the shivering, the gray exhaustion etched into my face. She didn't see the billionaire. She saw a wreck. "Dad." My God, what happened? I opened my mouth to speak, to tell the lie I had prepared, but my throat closed up. The cold, the rejection, the fear of the mental institution. It all crashed down on me. I swayed. She didn't wait for an answer. She didn't ask why I hadn't called in 2 years. She didn't ask about the insults I had thrown at her husband. She ran. She closed the distance and slammed into me, wrapping her grease-stained arms around my neck. She held me with a ferocity that knocked the wind out of me. She didn't care that she was getting oil on my jacket. She didn't care that I was wet. "You're freezing," she cried into my shoulder. Mark, get out here. Now." The door to the back office flew open. Mark ran out. He was a big man, broad shoulders, hands the size of shovels, wearing a flannel shirt that mirrored my own. I remembered telling Lucy he was blue-collar trash, who would never amount to anything. Mark saw me. He saw his wife crying. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed a heavy wool blanket from a shelf of supplies and wrapped it around my shoulders, rubbing my arms to generate heat. "I've lighted him to the heater," Mark commanded, his voice deep and calm. "I'll boil water." They sat me on a stack of tires, next to a space heater. The warmth hit me like a physical blow, making my skin prickle. "I lost it all, Lucy," I lied. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Lying to Robert felt like strategy. Lying to Lucy, while she knelt before me, chafing my frozen hands, felt like a sin. The company, the house. The feds took everything today. Robert and Sarah. They turned me away. Lucy looked up at me, her eyes fierce and wet. "Screw them," she spat. "Screw them all. You're home now, Dad." Home, I thought. She didn't ask for money. She offered warmth. They lived in the apartment above the garage. We walked up a narrow, steep metal staircase that rang under our boots. The apartment was tiny, maybe 600 square feet, 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, and a living area that doubled as a dining room. It was clean, but it was worn. The linoleum was peeling in the corner. The radiator clanked and hissed like a dying beast. But it was warm, and it smelled of tomato sauce and oregano. "We don't have a guest room," Lucy apologized, looking around the small space as if seeing it through my judgmental eyes. "Dad, you take the bed. Mark and I will take the pull-out couch." "I can't," I protested, clutching the blanket. "I can't kick you out of your own bed." "You will," Mark said. He was standing by the stove, making tea. He turned to me. His face wasn't angry, just resolved. "Your family, Frank. Family takes the bed." I looked at Mark. I searched for a hint of resentment. I was the man who had boycotted his wedding. I was the man who had called his profession simple. There was no resentment, only a quiet duty. That night, I lay in their bed. The sheets were flannel, soft from 100 washes. Through the thin floorboards, I could hear them whispering on the couch below. "Is he okay?" Mark whispered. "He looks so old, Mark," Lucy wept softly. "He looks broken. We'll fix him," Mark said. "That's what we do. We fix things." I turned my face to the pillow and wept silently, the sound masked by the hissing radiator. For 3 days, I lived in the shadow of their poverty. It wasn't the romanticized poverty of movies. It was a grinding, daily calculus of survival. I watched Lucy open the fridge. It was a bleak landscape, a carton of milk, a jar of pickles, a half loaf of bread, and a package of generic bologna. I sat at their small laminate table while they ate lunch. Lucy made a sandwich. She cut it in half. She put one half on a plate for me. Then she took the other half, cut that in half, gave a piece to Mark, and ate the last quarter herself. "I'm not that hungry," she lied, smiling at me. "I had a big breakfast." I knew she hadn't. I had heard her stomach growling. Lies, I thought, chewing the bologna that tasted like sawdust. Beautiful, painful lies. Robert lied to get rid of me. Lucy lies to feed me. I wanted to reach into my boot, pull out the emergency credit card Arthur had hidden in the sole, and order a feast. But I couldn't. The test wasn't over, and the competency papers threat was still looming. I had to stay invisible. On the second afternoon, the reality of their struggle walked through the door. I was sitting in the shop, watching Mark rebuild a transmission. He worked with a surgeon's precision, his large hands moving with delicate grace among the gears and valves. The side door opened. A man walked in. He was short, thick-necked, wearing a cheap polyester suit that strained at the buttons. He was chewing on a toothpick. Tony, the landlord. The air in the shop changed instantly. Mark stiffened. He put down his wrench. "Tony," Mark said, wiping his hands, "I thought you were coming Friday." "I'm in the neighborhood," Tony said, his voice oily. He looked around the shop, his eyes landing on the few cars in the bays. "Business looks slow. It's steady," Mark said. Tony's eyes shifted to me. I was sitting on a stool in the corner, wearing one of Mark's spare work shirts. "Who's the old guy?" Tony asked, pointing with his toothpick. "Another mouth to feed." "You running a charity ward now, Mark?" "He's family," Mark said, stepping between me and Tony. His voice dropped an octave. "Watch your mouth." "Family don't pay the bills," Tony spat. He took a step closer to Mark. "Rent's late." Again. "You're 2 weeks behind. I'm not a bank." "We had some unexpected expenses," Mark said, glancing quickly at me. "I'll have it Friday. I promise." "Friday," Tony said. "Noon, or I lock the doors. I sell the tools to cover the debt, and maybe I break a few fingers so you can't work for a while." "KP," Tony turned and walked out, kicking a bucket of oil dry on his way. Mark stood there, watching the door close. His hand was trembling. He clenched it into a fist and shoved it into his pocket so I wouldn't see. He turned to me, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eye, just a misunderstanding frank. "Don't worry about it." I looked at this man. He was protecting me from the truth, just as I had tried to protect my children from the truth of the world. But Mark was doing it with empty pockets and a full heart. The dampness of the garage and the drafty apartment finally caught up with me. On the third night, I woke up unable to breathe. My chest felt like it was filled with wet concrete. I coughed, a dry, rattling bark that shook the bed frame. Lucy was at my side in seconds. "Dad?" She felt my forehead. "You're burning up." "I'm fine," I wheezed. "Just a cold." "It's not a cold. It's bronchitis." "Maybe pneumonia." She looked at Mark, who was standing in the doorway in his boxers. "He needs the good medicine, the prescription stuff, and antibiotics." Mark nodded. "Go." I watched through the bedroom door as Lucy went to the kitchen. She reached for a glass jar on top of the fridge. It was labeled "New Tools" in black marker. It was their future. It was the scanner Mark needed for modern cars. It was the lift repair. She unscrewed the lid. She dumped it onto the table. Quarters, crumpled singles, a few tens. "No," I rasped, trying to sit up. "Lucy, no, that's for the shop. You're more important than a socket set, Dad," she said. She scooped the money into her purse. She didn't count it. She didn't hesitate. She sacrificed the business growth, the very thing Tony was threatening them over, for my lungs. She left into the night. I looked at Mark. "You shouldn't let her do that," I whispered. Mark looked at the empty jar. "Money comes and goes, Frank," he said softly. "But you only get one father." He sat in the chair next to the bed and kept watch until she returned. "I built skyscrapers," I thought, as the fever took me. "I built empires. But I never built anything as strong as what these two have in this tiny, broken room." The time was running out. My phone, hidden under the mattress, buzzed again. They have the judge. They are moving the timeline up. Tomorrow morning. Ian. Tomorrow. I closed my eyes. I had found the truth. Now I just had to survive long enough to use it. The fever broke in the afternoon, leaving me weak but lucid. The shop below was quiet. Lucy was out on a tow call, and Mark was in the back office, wrestling with the ledgers that I knew were bleeding red ink. A black sedan pulled into the alleyway behind the shop. It didn't look like a customer's car. It was too clean, the windows tinted too dark. It parked behind a stack of rusted shipping containers, hidden from the street. My phone buzzed. "Ali, now, Abotla." I put on my boots. My hands were steady now. The sickness had burned away the fear, leaving something harder underneath. I walked down the back stairs and slipped out the side door. The window of the sedan rolled down. The face inside was familiar, though I hadn't seen it in years. Detective Miller, a man I had used for corporate background checks in the 90s. He was older now, his face lined like a roadmap of bad decisions. "Frank," he whispered, "get in. We don't have much time." I slid into the passenger seat. The car smelled of stale cigarettes and peppermint. "You in?" I asked. "Arthur hired me the minute you initiated the protocol," Miller said, handing me a thick manila envelope. He wanted eyes on the kids. He wanted to make sure the simulation didn't turn into a real homicide. "What did you find?" "Robert isn't just greedy, Frank. He's desperate. He's leveraged the company assets to cover his own bad bets and derivatives. If the audit goes through, he goes to federal prison." Miller tapped the steering wheel. "That's why he's working with Dr. Evans." I opened the file. It was a dossier of betrayal. Photos of Robert meeting Evans. Bank transfer records showing payments to Evans's offshore account, and a draft of a medical filing. "They aren't just taking the company," Miller said, his voice grim. "They are forging medical records. This document claims you've been suffering from advanced vascular dementia for 6 months. They have dates, fake incidents, witness statements from staff they paid off." I read the word. "Patient exhibits confusion, aggression, inability to manage financial affairs. They want to annul every decision you made this year," Miller continued, "including the changes to the will, including the bankruptcy protocol. They want to declare you mentally incompetent, lock you in a facility in Switzerland, and rewrite history." "And Sarah?" I asked, looking at the rain-streaked window. "She knows. She's not the mastermind, but she's signed the affidavits. She's letting them do it so she can keep the trust fund unlocked. She's terrified of being poor, Frank." I closed the file. The weight of it sat on my lap like a tombstone. My own children. They weren't just letting me fall. They were pushing me off the ledge, and they were preparing to pave over the spot where I landed. "They are moving tonight," Miller said. "They have a judge on the payroll ready to sign the emergency order. If they find you, they can take you." "Let them come," I said softly. "Frank, you need to hide." "No," I said. "I'm done hiding. Stay close, Miller. When I text you, bring the thunder." The breaking point didn't come from the dossier. It came the next morning. I was lying in bed, pretending to be asleep. The sun was just coming up, casting a gray, watery light into the tiny apartment. In the kitchen, Mark and Lucy were whispering. The walls were thin. I could hear the desperation in their voices. "We need the rent money, Mark," Lucy was crying softly. I could hear the stifled sobs. "Tony isn't bluffing. He'll lock the doors. And Dad, he needs food. Real food. Not just sandwiches. He's getting worse." "I know," Mark whispered. His voice was cracked with fatigue. "I can sell my tools," Lucy said. "The Snap-on set. I can get 500 for it." "No," Mark said firmly. "You need those to work. If you sell the tools, the shop dies. If the shop dies, we starve." "Then what do we do? We have nothing left, Mark. We have nothing." Silence stretched out a long, agonizing pause. Then Mark spoke. His voice was heavy, resigned, but filled with a terrifying calm. "I'll sell it." "Sell what?" Lucy asked. Then a gasp. "Mark, no. No." I opened my eyes a sliver. Through the bedroom door, I saw them. Mark was twisting the gold band on his left ring finger. It was a simple band, scratched and worn. "Mark, that's your wedding ring," Lucy sobbed, grabbing his hand. "Please, not that. It's just metal," Mark said, his voice trembling slightly. "It's gold. Gold is high right now. I can get 3, maybe 400. But it's us," she cried. "The ring isn't us," Mark said, pulling her close. "We are us. Your dad, he's flesh and blood. He's sitting in that room, sick and hungry. I can't watch him die, Lucy." "I won't. But he hates you," she whispered. "He's never been kind to you." Mark paused. He looked at the ring, then pulled it off his finger. The skin underneath was pale compared to his grease-stained hand. "He's your father," Mark said. "That makes him my father, too. That's what marriage is." He kissed her forehead. "I'm going to the pawn shop on Fifth. I'll be back in an hour with groceries and the rent." Mark walked out. The door clicked shut. I lay there. Tears, hot and scalding, ran down my face into my ears. Robert wouldn't let me ruin his carpet. Sarah wouldn't let me ruin her massage. They were plotting to lock me away to save their fortunes. But Mark, a man I had judged, a man I had ignored, a man whose profession I had mocked, was selling the symbol of his marriage to buy me soup. The foundation wasn't concrete. It wasn't stocks. It was this. I waited until I heard Mark's truck start below. I sat up. The pain in my back was gone. The fatigue was gone. In its place was a cold, crystalline clarity. The engineer was back online. The load calculations were finished. The test was over. I grabbed the burner phone. I texted Arthur Henderson. "Now, bring the check. Bring the siblings. Bring the police. Bring the judge if you have to. It's time." Then I texted Detective Miller. "Arrest him. Now." I stood up. I went to the bathroom. I found a disposable razor. I shaved the white stubble, revealing the jawline that had terrified boardrooms for 4 decades. I washed the grease from my face. I combed my silver hair back. I put on my flannel shirt and canvas jacket, but I buttoned them differently. I stood differently. I walked out to the living room. Lucy was sitting at the table, her head in her hands. She looked up, startled by my movement. "Dad?" She wiped her eyes. "You should be resting." "I'm done resting, Lucy," I said. The rasp was gone. My voice was deep, resonant. The voice of the concrete king. "I'm feeling much better." "Where are you going?" "Downstairs," I said. "We're going to have company." We stood in the open bay of the garage. The rain was hammering the metal roof. A drum roll for the execution. A black limousine pulled into the muddy lot, its sleek lines looking alien against the piles of scrap metal. Lucy froze. She wiped her hands on a rag, stepping back instinctively. "Dad, what is that?" "That," I said, leaning against a stack of tires, "is the reckoning." Behind the limo, Robert's Porsche Cayenne splashed through a puddle. Then Sarah's Mercedes convertible, top up. Doors opened. Robert stormed into the garage first. He was wearing a trench coat, his face flushed with panicked anger. Dr. Evans was right behind him, clutching the medical file like a shield. "What is this?" Robert demanded, his voice echoing off the concrete wall. He stepped over a puddle of oil as if it were radioactive waste. "Henderson said we were meeting for asset liquidation. Why the hell are we in this dump?" Sarah followed, holding a scarf over her nose. "Oh my God, it smells like gasoline." "Dad, why are you here?" "We are here," I said calmly, "because this is where I live. Not for long," Robert snapped. He pointed at Evans. "Doctor, do your job. He's clearly delusional. Look at him. He's filthy. He's dragging us to a junkyard. Mr. Frank," Dr. Evans stepped forward, putting on his best bedside manner. "Frank, you're not well. We have an ambulance on the way. We're going to take you somewhere safe." Safe," I said. Just then, Mark walked back in from the street. He was soaked. He was holding a plastic grocery bag in one hand and a wad of cash in the other. His ring finger was bare. He stopped. He saw the limo. He saw Robert and Sarah. He saw the hostility. He dropped the groceries. He stepped in front of me, putting his large body between me and Robert. "Who are you?" Mark growled. Get away from him. Get out of the way, grease monkey, Robert sneered. This is family business. He is my family, Mark said, his fists clenching. The rear door of the limo opened. Arthur Henderson stepped out. He was impeccable in his suit, carrying a silver briefcase. He walked into the garage, ignoring the mud. Good morning, everyone, Arthur said pleasantly. Henderson, Robert barked, turning on the lawyer. Did you secure the Cayman transfer? Did you save the company? Is that why we're here? To sign the papers? The company? I said, my voice, cutting through the noise like a diamond saw, was never in danger. The garage went silent. The only sound was the rain and the distant hum of the city. Robert froze. He turned to me slowly. What? The bankruptcy, I said, stepping out from behind Mark. I stood tall, my posture dominating the room. The investigation, the frozen assets. It was a lie, a simulation. Oh, Sarah gasped, lowering her scarf. But the news, the TV. I own the news station, Sarah, I said. I bought the controlling stake 5 years ago. I can make the ticker say whatever I want. I looked at them. I looked at the fear dawning in their eyes. I wanted to know, I said. I wanted to know who loved me. I wanted to know who would open the door when I had nothing but the clothes on my back. I pointed a finger at Robert. I came to your door. I was cold. I was your father. You looked me in the eye, gave me $300 and told me to get lost because I might stain your reputation. I pointed at Dr. Evans. And you drank my scotch and plotted to lobotomize me legally. Dad, wait, Robert stammered, his face losing all color. It was a misunderstanding. We were stressed. We were trying to protect the legacy. We were scared. You were greedy, I said. And you were sloppy. I nodded to the thirdos in the back of the garage. Detective Miller stepped out. He was holding his badge up. 2 uniformed officers stepped out of the alleyway behind him, blocking the garage exit. Robert Frank, Miller said, his voice flat. You are under arrest for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit medical fraud. What? Sarah screamed. Robert, I have the recordings, Robert, I said. I have the emails. I have the bank transfers to Dr. Evans. Miller moved in. He spun Robert around and clicked the handcuffs on. The sound was distinct and final. Dad, you can't let them take me, Robert begged, struggling. I'm the CEO. This will destroy the stock. You're not the CEO, I said. You're fired, and I'm not the king anymore. I'm the primary witness. They dragged him toward the police cruiser. Dr. Evans was next, looking small and pathetic as the officers rid him his rights. I turned to Sarah. She was shaking, backing away until she hit the workbench. Dad, she whimpered. I didn't know about the medical stuff. I wanted the gala to be nice. You wanted the money, I said. I turned away from her. I walked to Mark. I took his hand. It was rough, calloused, and shaking. Mark, I said gently. Where's your ring? Mark looked down, ashamed. I lost it, Frank. While I was working. Don't lie to me, son, I said. You sold it. You sold it 20 minutes ago at the pawn shop on Fifth to buy me soup. Mark nodded, tears welling in his eyes. I had to. You sold your wedding ring for a man who called you trash, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You sold it for a man who hasn't spoken to you in 2 years. That is a man. That is a foundation. I turned to the silver briefcase. Arthur clicked the latches open. Inside was a single check and a small black velvet box. I took the box. I handed it to Mark. He opened it. His ring was inside. It caught the light of the neon sign. You bought it back? Mark whispered. I bought the pawn shop, I said, just to be sure they didn't resell it before I got there. Mark looked at me, stunned. He slid the ring back onto his finger. It fit perfectly. Then I reached into the briefcase and took the check. This check, I said, holding it up, is the liquid dividend from my private holdings. The emergency fund Robert was trying so hard to steal. I turned it so they could see the number, 117,000. Sarah gasped. Her eyes locked onto the zeros. 117 million, Sarah choked out. Suddenly, her fear vanished. Her face transformed into a mask of desperate affection. She ran to me, grabbing my arm. Dad. She put on a bright fake smile. Oh my God. I knew it. It was a test, right? Like a game. And we passed. We're all together. We didn't pass, Sarah, I said, pulling my arm away. Mark passed. Lucy passed. But they fix junk. Sarah stammered, pointing at Lucy. That money belongs to the family. To the legacy. She is the family, I said. She is the legacy. I handed the check to Lucy. It's yours, I said. Lucy stared at the paper. Her hands trembled. Dad, can't. This is too much. It's not enough, I said. Build the shop. Build the house. Build whatever you want, just don't build it on sand. I turned back to Sarah. And Sarah, I said coldly, no more allowance. No more trust fund. No more jets. You want orchids? Grow them? You want a penthouse? Get a job. You can't do this. Sarah wailed, stamping her foot like a child. I don't know how to work. I've never had a job. Then I suggest you start learning, I said. Arthur will validate your parking. Goodbye, Sarah. She stood there, wailing as Arthur gently guided her out of the garage. The garage was quiet again, save for the rain, but the door opened one last time. It was Tony, the landlord. He walked in, chewing his toothpick, looking confused at the departing police cars and the limo. What's going on? Tony asked, puffing out his chest. Where's my rent? It's noon, Mark. I turned slowly. I walked up to Tony. I towered over him. I was still wearing the flannel shirt, but I felt 10 feet tall. Tony, I said, you own this building. Yeah, Tony sneered. And if I don't get my money, I'm kicking these bums out. How much is this building worth? I asked. Tony blinked. Market value? Maybe 200,000. But the land is... I pulled a checkbook from my back pocket, the one Arthur had slipped me along with the box. I wrote a check. I ripped it out. 300,000, I said. Here. I shoved the check into his shirt pocket. Get out, I said. The deed transfer will be on your desk in the morning. Don't come back. Tony looked at the check. His eyes bugged out. He looked at me, then at the limo, then at Mark. He didn't say a word. He turned and ran into the rain. 6 months later, I sat on the porch of a new house. It wasn't a mansion. It was a sturdy brick 4-bedroom on a quiet street, 3 blocks from the shop. The shop had expanded. Lil and M&F Automotive. Lucy ran the business. Mark ran the floor. They had started a program training at-risk kids from the neighborhood how to fix cars. Robert is in a minimum security federal camp. He writes me letters. They are short. He is learning what sorry means, though I suspect he is mostly sorry he got caught. Sarah is working as a receptionist at an art gallery. She hates it. She complains about her feet. But last week she called me just to say hello. No requests, just hello. It's a start. Mark came out onto the porch. He handed me a mug of black coffee. He sat in the rocking chair next to me. He twisted the gold ring on his finger, a habit he still had. Cold a day, Mark said. It is, I agreed. I looked down at my hands. They were old, spotted, but they were steady. I thought about the silence of my mansion. I thought about the smell of lemon polish and fear. Then I looked at the driveway, where Lucy was teaching a teenager how to change the oil in an old Buick. I heard her laughter. I took a sip of coffee. The sun was setting over Chicago, casting long shadows over the concrete city I had helped build. For 50 years I thought a foundation was made of rebar and cement. I thought it was something you buried in the ground to hold up the sky. I was wrong. The real foundation is the hand that catches you when you fall. It's the ring sold in secret. It's the half sandwich given when you are starving. It was love. And for the first time in 72 years I was standing on solid ground. True wealth isn't what you hoard. It's who you hold when the world strips everything else away. If Frank's redemption resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of loyalty over luxury, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us pour the foundation for more stories like this. Stories that don't just entertain, but And before you go, tell us in the comments when the storm hits, who is the one person you know will open the door for you Let's build a community on that kind of truth.